You're scrolling through some secondhand marketplace online, maybe looking for something specific, maybe just browsing out of boredom. Then you spot it, that one item that just catches your eye. Could be anything really. An old camera, a vintage piece of furniture, maybe some kind of antique that looks way too good for the price they're asking. Your first thought is probably, what's the catch? But then you think, hey, if it works, why not? Well, today's story might just change how you feel about bringing home other people's old belongings. This one comes from Guangzhou, and it's about a guy we'll call Li Wei. Li Wei was pretty much your typical freelancer, spent most of his time working from home, writing copy for different clients, living alone in a small apartment that was nothing fancy. Just white walls, basic furniture, and one big window that looked out onto the street below. Simple setup, simple life. Li Wei wasn't the superstitious type either. He was practical, focused on his work, didn't really buy into ghost stories or any of that stuff. The kind of person who would roll his eyes if you started talking about haunted objects or cursed antiques. To him, old things were just old things, nothing more, nothing less. But sometimes being practical doesn't protect you from everything. It started on a Saturday morning when Li Wei was browsing online classifieds. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just killing time between projects. He had been thinking about getting a new desk chair since his current one was falling apart. But as he scrolled through the listings, something else caught his attention. A vintage mechanical typewriter. Not something he needed, obviously. He did all his work on his laptop, like any normal person, but there was something about it that made him pause. The listing described it as being in near-perfect condition, fully functional, ideal for collectors. The photos showed this beautiful dark metal typewriter with slightly yellowed keys. It looked like it had been well cared for, maybe even barely used. But here's the thing that really grabbed his attention: the price. It was suspiciously low. Like way lower than what you'd expect to pay for something like that in decent condition. Li Wei stared at the listing for a few minutes, trying to figure out what the catch might be. Maybe it didn't work as well as advertised. Maybe there was some damage that didn't show up in the photos. But then again, even as a decorative piece, it would look pretty cool sitting on his desk. And at that price, even if it turned out to be junk, it wouldn't be a huge loss. So he messaged the seller. The response came back pretty quickly. An elderly man who seemed polite and straightforward. They arranged to meet that afternoon at a small cafe not too far from Li Wei's apartment. The seller said he preferred meeting in person rather than shipping, which Li Wei thought was reasonable. Some people just like to do business face to face, especially the older generation. When Li Wei arrived at the cafe, he spotted the seller right away. An elderly man, probably in his late 70s, sitting at a corner table with the typewriter placed carefully in front of him. He was dressed in a worn gray cardigan and slacks. Nothing remarkable about him at all. Just a normal-looking old guy with a friendly demeanor. "You must be Li Wei," the man said, standing up with a smile as Li Wei approached. "Thank you for coming." "No problem at all," Li Wei replied, settling into the chair across from him. His eyes immediately went to the typewriter. Up close, it was even more impressive than in the photos. The dark metal had this rich, deep finish that you just don't see on modern machines. It was heavy, substantial, built to last. "It's beautiful," Li Wei said, running his fingers along the edge of the case. "How long have you had it?" The old man's smile grew a bit wistful. "Oh, decades now. It belonged to me for a very long time, but I don't use it anymore. Haven't touched it in years, really. Seemed like a shame to let it just sit there collecting dust." Li Wei nodded, examining the keys more closely. They were slightly yellowed with age, which was normal for something this old. But as he looked closer, he noticed something odd. There were these faint marks near some of the letters, almost like scratches, but not quite. They were subtle, barely visible unless you were really looking for them. "What are these marks here?" Li Wei asked, pointing to one of the keys. The old man leaned forward and glanced where Li Wei was pointing. "Oh, those. Just wear from use, I suppose. This typewriter saw a lot of action back in its day, but it still works perfectly. Go ahead, try it." Li Wei pressed a few keys, listening to the satisfying mechanical clicks. Each key responded smoothly, and the sound was crisp and solid. Whatever those marks were, they didn't seem to affect the functionality at all. "Everything seems to be in working order," the old man continued. "All the keys respond properly. The ribbon still has plenty of ink. You could start typing on it right now if you wanted to." Li Wei tested a few more keys, spelling out random words. The typewriter felt good under his fingers, responsive and well-maintained. Even if he never actually used it for writing, it would make an interesting conversation piece, and at this price, it really was too good to pass up. "I'll take it," Li Wei said without hesitation. The transaction was quick and straightforward. Li Wei handed over the cash, and the old man carefully placed the typewriter back in its case. As they shook hands, Li Wei noticed the man's smile seemed a bit different now, still friendly, but there was something else there, relief maybe, or was it just Li Wei's imagination? "I hope you get good use out of it," the old man said as they parted ways. "It has many stories left to tell, I'm sure." Li Wei thanked him and headed home, the typewriter case heavier than he'd expected. By the time he got back to his apartment, he was looking forward to finding the perfect spot for his new acquisition. He ended up placing it on the side of his desk next to his laptop and stacks of reference books. It fit right in, adding a touch of vintage character to his otherwise plain workspace. Li Wei stepped back to admire how it looked and felt pretty satisfied with his purchase. For the price he paid, he'd definitely gotten a good deal. That first night, Li Wei worked late as usual, focused on a project that had a tight deadline. The typewriter sat quietly beside him. Just another piece of furniture now. Nothing unusual happened. No strange noises, no weird feelings. Just a normal evening of work in his normal apartment. But around midnight, as Li Wei was deep in concentration, he heard something that made him pause. A faint clicking sound, like someone pressing typewriter keys very slowly. He looked over at the machine, but of course there was no one there. The keys weren't moving. Li Wei shrugged it off. Old things make noises as they settle, especially something mechanical like a typewriter. The metal was probably just adjusting to the temperature in his apartment or something like that. Nothing to worry about. He went back to his work and didn't think much more about it. But over the next few nights, the sound returned. Sometimes it was just a single click here and there. Other times, it sounded like someone was typing rapidly, fingers flying across the keys in short bursts, always when Li Wei was focused on something else, always just quiet enough that he could almost convince himself he was imagining it. By the fourth night, Li Wei was starting to get annoyed. The clicking was becoming more frequent and more distracting. He found himself glancing over at the typewriter constantly, expecting to catch it in the act of making noise. But every time he looked, it was just sitting there, silent and still. That's when things started to get really weird. On the fifth morning, Li Wei woke up and went to his desk to start work. As he was organizing his papers, he noticed something that made him freeze. There was a sheet of paper in the typewriter, a single white sheet with text typed across it in uneven letters. Li Wei stared at it, trying to remember if he had put it there. Maybe he had been messing around with the typewriter the night before and just forgot about it. But as he read the words on the page, a chill ran down his spine. The sentences were disjointed, almost nonsensical, random phrases that didn't seem to connect to each other, but scattered throughout the jumbled text were details that made Li Wei's blood run cold. personal details about his life that no one else knew, the name of his first pet, the street where he grew up, things he had never told anyone, things that weren't written down anywhere in his apartment. Li Wei pulled the paper from the typewriter with shaking hands, reading it over and over again. How could this information have gotten onto this page? There had to be some logical explanation. Maybe he had typed it himself in some kind of half-asleep state and just didn't remember. Maybe he was more tired than he realized and his mind was playing tricks on him. But deep down, Li Wei knew that wasn't the case. He remembered going to bed the night before, and he definitely remembered not touching the typewriter. The paper had appeared on its own, filled with impossible knowledge. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. Li Wei started noticing other changes around his apartment. Small things at first. His pens would be in different positions on his desk when he came back from the bathroom. Books that he'd left closed would be found open to random pages. His coffee mug would be moved slightly to the left or right from where he remembered placing it. At first, he tried to rationalize it all. Maybe he was just more distracted than usual, not paying attention to where he put things. Working from home for years had made him pretty routine-oriented, so maybe he was just noticing normal variations that had always been there, but the changes kept happening, and they were becoming harder to ignore. Then there were the shadows. Li Wei started catching glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, always just at the edge of his sight. Always gone the moment he turned to look. A tall, thin silhouette that seemed to linger near the corner of the room where his bookshelf stood. Sometimes it appeared to be standing, sometimes sitting, but it was always there for just a split second before vanishing completely. The first few times it happened, Li Wei assumed it was just his eyes playing tricks on him. Staring at computer screens all day could mess with your vision, make you see things that weren't really there. But the figure kept appearing, always in the same general area, always with the same elongated shape. What really started to freak him out was the typewriter itself. Sometimes when the room was completely quiet, Li Wei could swear he heard it breathing. Not the mechanical settling sounds from before, but actual breathing. Slow, deliberate inhales and exhales, like someone was sitting right in front of it. The sound was so faint that Li Wei couldn't be sure if it was real or if his mind was just filling in the silence. One evening, as Li Wei was working on a particularly complex project, he heard the familiar clicking sound start up again, but this time, instead of ignoring it, he decided to watch. He kept his eyes on his laptop screen, but tilted his head slightly so he could see the typewriter in his peripheral vision. That's when he saw it happen. One of the keys, the letter H, slowly pressed down on its own. There was no hand touching it. No visible force acting on it, but the key depressed with a soft mechanical click and then released. Li Wei's heart started racing. He forced himself to keep watching, and sure enough, a few seconds later, another key pressed down, then another. Li Wei's hands were shaking as he finally turned to look directly at the typewriter. The moment he did, everything stopped. The keys went still, the breathing sound disappeared, and the room felt normal again. But there, on the paper that was still loaded in the machine, was a single word typed in uneven letters. Help. That night, Li Wei packed up the typewriter and got it out of his apartment for good. He wrapped it in an old blanket, carried it down to the dumpster behind his building, and threw it in without looking back. For the first time in weeks, his place felt normal again. Quiet, peaceful, like he could finally breathe. But here's the thing that really gets me about Li Wei's story. Even after he got rid of that typewriter, he still hears those faint mechanical clicks late at night. Just every once in a while, usually when he's working alone in the dark. The typewriter's been gone for months now, but whatever was attached to it might not be finished with him yet. So what do you think really happened here? Was Li Wei just stressed out from working too much, or did that old man knowingly pass along something he wanted to get rid of? And here's the bigger question. When you're browsing those secondhand sites looking for a good deal, how do you know what kind of history you're really bringing into your home? Maybe some bargains are too good to be true for a reason. Let me know what you think in the comments below.